Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Just in Time Cafe. I'm Tracy O'Rourke, co-founder of the Just in Time Cafe. I'm going to be your host today. And if you've never been to the cafe before, you are in for a treat because we have a very exciting webinar today called 5 Ways to Build a Healthy Workplace, presented by Kim Crowder. Welcome, Kim. How are you today?
I'm amazing. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. I'm really excited about Kim. I've known Kim for at least 2 years now, I think, and I love her. We've done a couple of collaborations together. I'll tell you a little bit about her. Kim Crowder, she's a certified diversity, equity, and Six Sigma leadership powerhouse. She's been featured by Forbes several times, where she was named an anti-racism educator your company needs now. She is also a member of the MIT Technology Review Global Panel and Forbes The Culture, and has been seen in the New York Times, Business Insider, Katie Couric Media, Monster.com, on Cheddar News, LinkedIn News Live, and she's been heard on HubSpot's The Growth Show podcast. So she's got some powerhouse credentials to go with it. And I'm really excited to have her. And guess what else? An interesting personal fact about Kim. She's a singer. Kim, what kind of things do you sing?
Yeah, I love jazz. I love R&B. So I would say that those are the areas I focus. But fun fact, I sang opera in college.
All right. Very nice. She's also originally from Houston, but she's living currently in the Midwest. And so we are happy to have her at our virtual Just in Time Cafe. So before we get started on her amazing stuff today, I just have a few housekeeping notes. You can ask any questions anytime by entering the chat window. Kim, I'll monitor that for you. There's also a question area we'll be using in the chat window throughout the whole session. And we generally post by Monday of the following week. So if you want the slides and the recording, it'll be available by Monday on our website, the Just in Time Cafe. So thanks for following the instructions. We already have some people that have posted in the chat. Tell us where you are from. Let us know in the chat window. We have Evans from Marlton, New Jersey, Michelle from Jacksonville, Lolita from Maricopa County. Welcome. We have Aaron from Burlington, Vermont, Esther from Seattle. We have Noe from Calgary, Alberta. We have Hugh from Vancouver. How are you? And Jennifer from Portland, Grace from Sacramento, Emily from Brookings, South Dakota. We have Myra from Santa Barbara. We got people from all over. Jen from tuning in from Milwaukee. I thought that was a town. Tara from Phoenix, Cheryl from Hanksville, Marnie from Mississauga, Ontario. We've got a global North American presence here for your webinar, Kim. So that's exciting. All right, I'm going to cover just a few other things before we get started. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, if you haven't heard already, because I've been posting like a crazy person on LinkedIn about my global premiere party for my Lean Six Sigma spoof song, Baby Got Tools. That's later today at 2 p.m. Pacific. We're going to do the big reveal of this music video. I cannot wait to share this with you. I still laugh at myself every time I see it. You'll get to meet the music producer, and guess what? We've got some prizes that you can win as part of the webinar, as part of the party as well. So I'll put the link in the chat window before this webinar ends, and hopefully you can come to that. Katie Anderson is hosting the party along with me. Okay, just to give you an idea too, the next slide talks about the upcoming webinar that we have with Hugh Alley. This is going to be a really good one as well. It's called Salsa and Standard Work, Why You Need Recipes and How to Write Them. I love this. So they're doing a play on recipes and standard work. If you have a favorite meal, you probably have a recipe for it, maybe not written down, but it's there. But if you want to share it, you got to write it down. So it's same in the workplace, even if your work has nothing to do with food, anytime you need to reliably reproduce a product or service, you need a recipe. It's called standard work. And what is your work as a manager or supervisor? What is standard for you? So that's coming up March 30th. Actually, that's this month in 2 weeks. Elizabeth Swan's going to be hosting with Hugh Alley. So you don't want to miss that one. And finally, we have our latest podcast out with Miguel Rodriguez from UC San Diego. He's in the Lean IT group. Not only do they have classes to the public at UC San Diego, but they are actually implementing process improvement within the entire institution. So you're going to hear from Miguel about what he's doing in IT to make his processes better and streamlined. And we also talk a lot about Process Palooza, which is a huge conference that UC San Diego puts on every year to celebrate process improvement. That's happening this month as well. All right, so those are my announcements. I will put all the links to all of those things in the chat window so you have them. And I'm going to hand it over now to the Kim Crowder.
The took me, just cracks me up. Thank you, Tracy. Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to meet you all. Some of you I know. I saw Joy Mason in the chat. Joy is amazing here in Indianapolis, as I am. And what we are going to talk about today, I'm just going to like slide through all these because Tracy did that work. 5 ways to use data to build and maintain healthy workplaces. This is for executives and leaders. And here's what I want to say about this, right? What I love, what I'm most excited about is that everyone on the webinar, you all are data nerds, you're process improvement people. So I can speak my language to you, right? I'm really excited about that. And I want to talk about this specifically as it relates to people. Let me tell you first where this idea came from. So I was on a call with a reporter, and I remember the reporter asked me a very interesting question. They said, Kim, how do you know if your employees are unhappy at work? And I thought about that in responding to them. And what I came back with is that behavior is not the way to figure it out. That's different, right? Because oftentimes we're told that employee behavior should tell us whether or not they're happy at work. And I'm going to counter that, because what we know is that employees can show up to work. They can act anyway, right? Accordingly, right? They can show up to work, have a great attitude, and then go home at night with a bottle of wine and apply for jobs, right? You got to have the wine when you do it, right? Because applying for jobs can be a lot, or they're connecting with recruiters on a regular basis. And so I want to give us tools for how do we build those healthy workplaces without relying on our employees and our team members to tell us whether or not they are happy at work. So what we believe is that this is grounding for you. And it is something that you can do whether or not you ask for employee feedback, or at least is a start. So here's what we ask of you in any type of presentations I do. I ask you to be present. And you go, Kim, what does be present mean? Be present means is that you turn off those dings. So anything that dings your phone, that those emails that you keep looking at, that Slack channel that you want to keep looking at, turn them off. We've just got an hour. You don't want to miss any of this. You don't want to blink, and you don't want to look over and go, darn it, I wish I could remember what Kim said, right? So turn those off right now. Anything that dings or that has notifications, turn that off, and then be engaged. And so what engage means is use the chat, ask questions as necessary. There is a Q&A. And so we're going to do that at the end. And also take notes. Feel free to do that in your phone, whether or not you have a notepad. I use Remarkable 2. If anybody knows what that is, if you're a Remarkable 2 fan, put that in the chat. But I use Remarkable 2 to take all my notes because I will lose paper. And then the last thing I'm going to ask you to do is breathe. And so we're going to do a round of breath. And here's what that means. Your days are busy. My days are busy. And sometimes we need a moment to reset and focus. And so use this breath technique that I'm going to share with you throughout as you need it, right? If you have moments where you're like, whoa, this is a lot. Whoa, I'm feeling a certain way. Use this breath as a grounding practice. And so here's what I want you to do. Take both of your hands, put them flat down on the desk in front of you, or you can put them on your thighs. Roll your shoulders back a little bit, roll them forward if you need to, roll your neck around. And then you can close your eyes if you'd like. And I'm going to ask, we're just going to breathe through one round of 4. We're going to breathe in for 4 through your nose, hold it, breathe out through your mouth for 4. You ready? All right. So go ahead, breathe in 1 through your nose, 2, make it deep. 3, expand those lungs and ribcage. 4, hold it. Now breathe out through your mouth. 1, 2, nice and slow. 3, 4. All right. Come back and do that as often as you need to. So let's talk about our goal today. You can take a screenshot of this. It's that you walk away with 1 or more implementable solutions, period, right? We want you to walk away with something of value. We provide more value through the Kim Crowder Consulting newsletter. So you can sign up for the newsletter at kimcrowderconsulting.com. I'm going to just hold on for a second. I'm going to show you a screen of what we need you to do. And there's a reason why I want to specifically know if you found us through JIT Cafe. You get more value by finding time for a diagnostic meeting in which you will walk away with one strategic approach based on your needs to being an executive and leader. Email I'm in to assessment at kimcrowderconsulting.com. You can email now. I'm in to assessment at kimcrowderconsulting.com. We'll meet with you and then just talk about what you've got going on in your workplace and things that you may need solving. And then we'll give you feedback on that. You should trust you. So you build trust in relationships by sharing this learning session with at least one more person who could use it, at least one more person, right? You want to connect with somebody and maybe you don't know how. This is a great way to do it. You want to pull in an executive, or frankly, is there just a leader who could use it? You can, this is a great opportunity to help them without helping them. And just forward this over once that recording is out. So as you sign up for the newsletter, you can do that on Kim Crowder Consulting, go to contact, and then you scroll down right here where it says, tell us about your business and your project. Tell us about your project, but also tell us how you heard about Kim Crowder Consulting if it was through JIT Cafe, because we're going to do something special for you all. And so we want to make it clear. All right, so let's get into it. So speaking of our engagement, we said, join the newsletter, get sign up details for our next public learning experiences. We're going to do some public learning experiences where we really do a deep dive and walk through, and you get to hear from people from other organizations, right? To get those ideas and that innovation flowing. Also be the first to know when our new podcast launches. We are launching a podcast this year. I'm so excited. And then you'll get a powerful resource email to your inbox about exit interviews. That's a big part of this conversation. So you can't, show your hands, right? We're not doing that, but in the chat, where are you on your data journey as it relates to people? As it relates to people in your organization, on your teams? Are you just now beginning to track team member data as a leader? And I want you to be honest, nobody knows, right? Except for you. Put that information down in the chat. You've been tracking and implementing team members' data for more than 2 years. You've been doing this for more than 10 years where you've been looking at the data as a leader in the organization. I see it just starting. Thank you. Thank you so much. Grace says we have quarterly pulse for about 6 months. That's Grace. Michelle says we're just starting. Or you want to track, but you're not sure how. You want to track, but you're not sure how. So drop that down in the chat. That's really helpful for us to understand and know. And so I want to talk about leadership, because oftentimes we talk about leadership from a place of behaviors that is important, but we want to talk about leadership also from a place of values, right? And so what are your values as a leader? Here's mine. When I think about leadership for me, it is racial justice, it is gender justice, it is economic justice, it's climate justice. As a leader, I want to be thinking about justice, right? And so in that, let's talk about why we are here. We're here because of possible outcomes when our executive and leadership strategies are rooted in data and when it is not, right? What does that look like when it is, and what does it look like when it isn't? And we care. Let's just be honest. Many of us want to be better leaders, sometimes in the midst of everything that can be challenging. And one of the things I want to throw out up front about ways that your team members could be experiencing the workplace, right? Because we're talking about data. 3 out of 5 U.S. employees have witnessed or experienced discrimination, according to the 2019 Diversity and Inclusion Study by the Harris Poll. 3 out of 5. It's a good number, right? Like literally, if you were thinking about your team and you could start counting, 3 out of 5 of them, all right? And according to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the average settlement for employment discrimination claims is about $40,000 each. Nobody wants to cost their organization $40,000 because maybe their leadership abilities, maybe they're without knowing, or frankly, just maybe knowing and hadn't, thought about it being important. We don't want to cost our organizations $40,000. That's waste, right? When we talk about in terms of process improvement, it's waste. And so let's look at some major brands that have experienced legal and social media crisis due to discrimination. There's quite a few. If you can remember any, just drop them down in the chat. Can you think about anything that exploded, right? Where you're like, oh, wow, they had this big crisis in social media or a legal crisis due to discrimination. I can name some. We've seen this with Amazon, Basecamp, Google, Tesla, some of these big names. Facebook, Meta, Wells Fargo. Recently, we've seen Chief, Blizzard, Uber, right? There are tons, name them in the chat. And we don't want to be the cause of that, do we, right? We don't want to cause that. Starbucks, yes, these major brands that are now connected and have lost customer base and also employee base because of discrimination claims. So, just for those folks who just joined, sign up for the newsletter at kimcrowderconsulting.com. You'll hear about our next public learning experiences, which we're excited about, know about the podcast, and then you can read the rest. Here's what I want to ask you. What's your definition of leadership? If you can name, just give me 1 or 2 words. If you could drop 2 or 3 words in the chat, what is your definition of leadership? And I'm actually going to pause here for a second because I want you to actually do this. What is your definition of leadership? Nicole says, by example. Yeah, absolutely. That's a big one. Anybody else? One who inspires. I love that, Joy. One who inspires. I love that when we talk about impact and legacy. Humble and approachable. Oh, wow. Taking the high moral ground, empowering, servant, supporting dreams, motivate. All of those things create human values. Ooh, Terry, I love that one. Creating a safe place for their employees. Layla, yes, right? Accountability. Jen Murphy says, and so all of these are part of leadership, right? And then here's what I want to talk about. When we think about leadership, this is like the secret internal thoughts of executives and leaders. These are the things that maybe we don't get to see out in public, but that the conversations you're having inside, right? Missed goals, right? Those things that keep you up at night. Questioning, am I a good leader? Am I? When I have, there are high turnover rates for organizations, teams, and departments, when that keeps showing up, we want to look good, don't we? We want to also be rewarded, and there's nothing wrong with that. What will my legacy say about me? Some of us are legacy focused. All of us are driven differently. How do I get necessary buy-in? I want to do this, but how do I get buy-in? What does that look like? Will I fail? Will I fail? That is probably a big one, right? A concern of if I do X, Y, and Z, no matter what it is, will I fail? And I have so much work. How am I supposed to do this with all of the work that I already have? Does anything sound connected for you all? You can just say yes or give a thumbs up in the chat. If you're like, yes, I worry about some of these things on a regular basis, you can respond down in the chat because we want to know if that connects with you. Michelle Ortiz says yes, all day. And we also know what executives and leaders think about when we start to think about the organization, right? That's personal. But now when we start thinking about the organization, enterprise-wide strategy and impact. How do we impact the organization? And where does that start? On what level? Internal and external brand risk. We often think about brand risk out in the public. Very rarely are we thinking about what are our team members saying. And the reason that matters is because think about all of the platforms that are now available for people to say how they feel about work. Indeed.com, right? That's a big one where team members, possible team members, that top talent is doing their research on organizations and even their possible managers, those names that could come up, right? Because people name people sometimes on those, or they name a department. Revenue, right? Are we meeting revenue? Are we meeting profit share? What does that look like? Team member engagement. Are our team members engaged? Are our team members engaged in the work that they're doing? Are they bringing their A game? Well, are they really bringing everything they have in that innovation? That doesn't mean overworking team members. I'm not into that. But in the time that we work with our team members, do they feel like they can bring in that engagement necessary in order to do the best work possible? And then talent acquisition and retention, for instance. Do these connect with any of you as well? When you start to think about what you think about with the organization, does any of this connect with you? Let me know. A few more things you may think about: crisis communication, exposure risks, board engagement, performance reviews, hopefully team member satisfaction. All of these are things we have to consider as leaders on top of doing the work every day, like the actual work for our roles. I'm going to pause for a minute. If any of this is connecting with you, just jot down in the chat, say, yes, it is. Yes. Or you can easily say no. If it is not, that's fine too. So give me something. Let me know how you're feeling. Show, share an emoji. Tracy or Aurora gives us fire. Jen Murphy says, yes, it is. Tracy says, absolutely. So, I can't see you, but I do need that connection, right? Yes. I get some yeses in there. Hand clap. Awesome. Thank you, Layla. Thank you, Evans. So here's the deal. What we're going to look at is understanding team members' identities, knowing that team member identities is a major cornerstone of executive and leadership function. I said luncheon. I was hungry when I typed that up. But an executive and leadership function, that it is deeply important, right? Because team members show up in different ways in the workplace. Everybody is not the same. And so oftentimes leadership strategies, what I want to talk about is how do we redefine that, to think about that maybe this thing, as I was trying to do it, doesn't work across the board. You think about when you show up for a nutritional plan, right? You may see a dietitian or someone like that, somebody who's a nutritionist, and you go in, and what if they gave you the exact same thing as a baby? You go, this doesn't make sense, because it is not focused on you. It is not an equitable way. Right? Equity is giving people what they need instead of the very same thing. And so you go, but I'm an adult, I need different things. And even in adults, based on gender, based on activity levels, all of this is part of it, right? Based on any deficiencies, right? All of this is a part of it. And so as leaders, we need to think about how do we build our leadership and executive function based on that, and know that being people focused at work is humanizing. It is relational and it's transformational. So I'm going to hop right into it. What is one way to use data to build and maintain healthy workplaces? Gather and review the data that matters. What data matters? This will differ based on organization and teams, though this is a strong baseline. It's a strong guideline as step one. So here's what we uncovered. I want to do this through a case study instead of sort of like just saying here. Through a case study, we had an organization that could save close to $9 million with a strong retention plan. If they had a strong retention plan, they could save $9 million, which means they were losing $9 million because of not having that. Specifically retaining those of historically ignored racial backgrounds and women, who made up the bulk of who they were losing. $9 million a year. But you want to be costing your organization $9 million a year? What we talk about waste all the time, right? The organization had no folks from historically ignored racial backgrounds in positions that held the highest levels of leadership and power, specifically the C-suite in the corporate area, corporate space, right? And so that could be really challenging, actually. And I want to reframe that. I think they had one, and then there were some women, but the women all had the same backgrounds. And so what we uncovered through data as a case study is that their brick and mortar locations for the organization that had folks who had been historically ignored due to race as leaders had more racial diversity throughout that location's team members, just by nature of putting that in place. Promotions benefited white women most in rate, though white men in pay regarding highest level of positions held, right? So white women were being promoted the most, but still white women were being paid more. Does that sound equitable? No. Organization, they touted being 90% women, though the experiences of those women based on race and other historically ignored identities were vastly different. And this is why when we talk about what data should you be gathering, what you should be looking for, that can be different. So let's talk about how detailed we can get with this. Of the close to 9 million individuals that have been historically ignored due to race, or those that specified other, made up a large portion of turnover, costing the organization an estimated 4.6 plus million, even though those groups make up only 44% of the organization. Drop in, how do those numbers strike you? Is that surprising? Is that shocking? What do you feel when you see those numbers? And we believe this was a conservative estimate. We actually use the lowest common denominator here. Next time we'll probably, do ranges on that. But how does that, seeing something like that, make you feel as a leader? How does that make you feel as a leader? Would you want that to be you? Would you want this in your workplace? Huge loss and shame. Yeah. Shannon, right? It's a huge loss. And so we talked about our goal for today. So the way that we want you to think about this, when you look at that, is you can turn your turnover rates into a monetary value. You can put that, you can put a number to that, right? What are we losing? And then you can even expand out to, what does that mean for time? Are we losing time because we're losing people and then we have to retrain and bring people back in, right? So thinking about it in that way, because what that does is keeps us accountable. If we're looking at those numbers on a regular basis, then we can make decisions based on that. Way 2 is to use data to measure for success. And so the data must be attached to accountability every time. And so accountability could mean that we review those numbers with the team, with the organization, that we're transparent. Accountability and transparency must go hand in hand. It also means that it could be connected to job performance reviews. So when you take a step back and go, okay, what is my goal here for the next year? Can you connect it to some of the data around what that team looks like? Clearly define goals for everyone in the organization, departments, and teams. This may be different throughout, right? Your team may have a very different goal. And when is the last time we got on a call with our team and said, hey, here's the goal, particularly around our people. Our people. Here's how we want to lead people. And so in that, we want to define some goals for everyone, not just on focusing on the product. And then the organization's definition of workplace health should be strongly and regularly communicated across the workplace, right? What is organizational health? What does that even mean? Do we have a definition for that for ourselves? Do we have a definition of what it means to be a leader that promotes organizational health? And so it's something to consider, right? You could go home tonight and do that. You could do it right now, right after this one. What does organizational health mean as a leader, and how do I execute and communicate that to the team? That's a great way to start with a plan. And here's how to measure for success. According to an article by Harvard Business Review, organizations that set goals, collect data, and examine change over time in the comparison to other organizations are most successful in their diversity efforts. And the reason why I change out diversity and leadership is because it must be a part of leadership. We just looked at companies that were ousted in the media. And it wasn't just because of something they had done externally. A lot of that is because of what was happening inside the organization that then transferred externally. And so we have to see these as executive and leadership functions. When we looked at that organization, just a quick look at this, the turnover rate, you see that in 2020 for Black or African Americans was 103%. In 2021 is 101%. 2 or more races. So you can look at that. Hispanic or Latino increased in the next year. 2 or more races increased. And so when we look at numbers that way, as leaders, you go, okay, something here is not clicking, right? But if we are not seeing those numbers in that way, then it's not making the impact that it needs to. And if we're not looking at that as we're making decisions, it's not connecting as it needs to. How's everybody feeling? Drop down in the chat. Drop down in the chat. Is anybody ever looking at the data like this? Or you go, gosh, I really wish I were looking at it. Layla says, so true. How's everybody feeling about this? Way 3, to use data to build and maintain healthy workplaces. Organizations should, absolutely, Tracy. Knowing what to measure. Here's 4 quick tips. Identify who is leaving the organization or teams at the highest and fastest rates. It's a great way to do it. Identify that. Second, recognize who is least represented in positions of power and leadership. Who are those folks? What are their identities? Follow the workplace experience and life cycles of women, particularly. And the reason why women are so important is because women of color are least likely to move into executive leadership positions. And so we follow their track, we can solve, and usually it benefits everyone for the most part, right? When there's benefits, you think about the civil rights movement. Often we don't talk about that, but people think the civil rights movement was only about race, but it also included people with disabilities. It included gender. It included a multitude of things that went beyond. It included pay. And so when we think about that, right? It benefited everyone, immigration. And so that's how we want to think about this, right? If we're going to connect with really building out a team that is strong and innovative and has different points of views that are not about diversity of thought, right? Because part of that is based on your identity, how you think, your viewpoints. Then this is what we do. We look at the life cycles. Are they, at what point are they stalling out? Where are maybe that we not meaning to, but not putting them on projects? Where are they not getting projects or exposure, right? In ways that other groups are. And then that last one is be sure to understand the nuances in cultural and geographical differences for people. Some of us are leading teams that are across the world. Some of us have global, have a global outlook within the organization. And so even in the ways that we communicate, one of the things, I have team members from all around the world, literally. And I'll be sitting and typing and I'll go, I'll use an American colloquialism. I actually did that today. And I was like, ooh, that is maybe something that team member might not understand. And that's a small one, but those are the types of things we should be thinking about, because it could be that person doesn't communicate back as maybe directly as folks in the US. And there could be a reason why. And we look at leadership and diversity. Women in the workplace, 2/3 of workplace aggressions happen to women. Black women in the workplace have the highest rate, and it creates a lack of innovation and support. So women are 20% less likely when they don't have a leader that looks like them to have their ideas and their points of views greenlit. LGBTQI plus is 21% less likely. Black folks are 24% less likely. And then also when you have a leader that connects with you, when you have a leader that has the same identity as you, you decrease employee turnover at 50%, right? So way forward, to use data to build and maintain healthy workplaces. Here's some questions to guide honoring team gaps and building bridges. What does the data say around that? Let's come up with some questions here that can help us gather some data. So here's some questions to ask. Who's underrepresented on my team or within the organization? Who is that? And you all are welcome to screenshot this once I put them all here. What gaps in understanding that those on my team have regarding cultural competency? And you go, what's cultural competency? Cultural competency is the ability to take a step back and realize that the person you're looking at may not see life the way you do, and that you are willing to adjust based on that. That's cultural competency. Cultural humility, I talk about that quite a bit, is you're willing to say, I don't know this. And I'm going to be humble enough to be okay with that. And then I'm going to do my homework to figure out more. I'm going to get curious as a leader. What gaps does my team have in fully understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I want to get away from diversity, equity, inclusion as sort of like DEI, but what gaps does my team have in fully understanding diversity by itself, what equity is, and then what inclusion is, and what that specifically looks like on our team? Are there gaps there? Have we defined that for our team members? We should, right? What are barriers to success around implementing holistic DEI strategies? Do we have barriers to success around that? What might be standing in our way? Could it be our hiring practices? As we are, for instance, talking to recruiters, if we're a hiring manager, are we making it really clear what's important to us? And if that recruiter isn't delivering, pushing back or finding another recruiter, right? We've got to get direct about this and make it clear that this is going to be important. Not only does that build trust with your team members who are watching you operate in that way, but you get to inspire. I like to say we're all like rocks being dropped in a pond and we ripple out. And so we get to inspire other people. Other people will see that and be inspired by that. What are the detractors that we have been unwilling to engage? What makes us really uncomfortable in this conversation? And so because of that, we've shut down, or we're like, I'm not going there, or we just feel like we don't know enough. What are those? What are 2 areas that we could focus on now based on that? And then who are champions and ambassadors that we have yet to connect with? Are there folks in the organization that totally are about this, that are totally excited, and we just haven't made those connections? How can we do that? Send this presentation. That's one way you can do it. And then if we take in a look at our power and privilege, right? How does our own identity impact the way that others not only view us and interact with us, but then how we may impact others. I love this wheel of power and privilege, because then you get a sense of who has the most power based on societal norms in the United States in particular. And actually, this is global. And then move that out to how are people more marginalized based on their identities, right? I fall on a lot of these scales, but also I will say this, I have also changed over time. I'm heterosexual, that's one area of power. I speak English, right? I probably make more money than most people do, right? I'm robust in personality, a little bit, maybe if you haven't noticed. But then, at one point in my life, socioeconomically, that wasn't the case. And so we may move in and out of this at different periods, as your team members may. And so it's great to sort of think about this. How does my identity play a role maybe in how I lead and how people experience me as a leader? So way five, make sure the data focuses on more than your workplace. All right, more than your workplace. So we need an exploration of how societal and historical norms have created the current workplace and what we deem as acceptable as power. What we deemed as acceptable is it's powerful, and it's also leadership redefining. So we have to redefine leadership based on looking at societal norms. So how do we get outside of our workplaces? We often like to think of our workplaces as silos, right? This is our workplace culture and that's it, and it's not impacted by anything else. And we know that's not true. But we also know that's true with our positioning as leaders, our positioning as executives. And so that is why the data keeps us really honest, because the data forces us to get past our beliefs to look at what's actually happening. And then are we familiar with who those protected classes really are? And if our team members have been so willing to share, do we know where they fall in as far as protected classes on our teams or within the organization? Do we have a general sense of that for the organization overall? No one should have to self-identify if they don't want to, but are we just keeping this in mind? Are we keeping this in mind as we're working with people? One of the things we hear from folks who are 45 plus is about age discrimination in the workplace and how that functions, where people may feel like they're left out, especially if other people in the organization are of a particular age. And even in project assignments, maybe those folks aren't being heard when they raise their hand. Thinking about your leadership work and how it needs to be intersectional. This is a really important one. Remember when I talked about women of color and women of color's experience in the workplace? That is what we call intersectional. So they are both a woman and they are both racialized. And so that is what, though they have two identities that intersect along how they could be discriminated against. Now let's add something to that. Many of us work in manufacturing, right? When we look at that. And so socioeconomically now, there could be a woman of Latino background or a woman of Asian descent, right? And then you look at race, woman, and then socioeconomic status and how that directly impacts them. And so your decisions trickle down into that. And when we go back to that wheel of power and privilege, if our own identities do not match theirs, can we make decisions that are best for them? Or do we need to expand the way that we gather information and the way that we make decisions? Do we need to make sure that's democratized a little bit? Where can we bring in other voices? All right. So don't forget, again, you can, the goal today is we want you to walk away with an implementable solution. One thing that you can do today. And so as you start to do that, I'll ask the question later on. If that's true, we want to know, yes, if you did or you didn't. We always want to grow ourselves. And part of that, we believe in a feedback chamber, which we encourage leaders. We don't want an echo chamber. We want feedback chamber where we are receiving and giving out feedback. We want to provide you with more value. Sign up for the newsletter at kimcrowderconsulting.com. And if you would like to find time for a diagnostic meeting where we just sit down and listen to maybe an issue that you have, and you get one way to walk away, one strategic way to deal with it, email assessment@kimcrowderconsulting.com and say, I am in, I need help. I just, I want to learn more about how we can make a change. And then you build trust and relationships by sharing this learning session with at least one more person who could use it, right? Who could use it in some way, whether they send this out to other people or whether or not for themselves. Remember, we talked about making those connections, right? At the prior. Connect data with processes and systems. You all already do that. But then I want to think about, how do we do that for people? So map out the processes and systems involved in an area of focus that is needed most. So one of them, as I mentioned, could be hiring, but it also could be team member promotions and project assignments. So if you're like, you know what, I'm noticing that the same people are raising their hand for projects, or that certain groups are not being involved and included in projects, get real curious about why. Some people don't want it, but also some people feel like they wouldn't be invited into it, or if they came into it, that people wouldn't be open, or they don't have enough ideas. So map out that process. How are people being chosen? Who has the ability to move people forward in that way? And map out that process, lay that out. And then decide what are quick wins versus long-term goals, so that you can build some KPIs around this. Okay, great. So what we notice is that when we look at maybe in an organization and we look at project assignments, what we noticed is that the women tend to do more of what we call scut work, right? Scut work, you'll hear that in the health systems, where they're taking notes or where they may be putting together the actual report, but then are they guiding the direction of the actual project, right? That could be different. Are they more silent? Are they being asked to do things above and beyond, as opposed to other folks on the team? Right? Or are we, are we letting certain people present out to larger groups? Right? Are we clear on that? Or have we promoted certain people instead of others? And so taking note on that, looking at that, how much are we communicating with certain team members versus others? All of these are possible ways to build KPIs for success. So, one of the ways we looked at how we can look at how racism impacts the hiring practice, right? So we think it's like not hiring. What we think it looks like is just like not hiring people who are fully qualified. But really, it goes down to things like screening job applicants, screening out job applicants that are overqualified. We look at what interviewing means, avoidance in the behavior in the interview, including frowning, making less eye contact, leaning away, right? Even our body language can make people uncomfortable. Asking interview questions that are culturally biased. Remember, I talked about based on where you live, the language, the wording that is used. Even though someone may be a pro at speaking English, that doesn't mean in their country where they learned it, that they may use colloquialism. So Amy said, even earlier in the job advertising process too, does it sound like you're looking for people who match your current org? Yeah, where you're advertising. Using language. Textio is really great in, they have a tool where they provide, where you can see if your language is biased without meaning to. Things like rock star, right? We've heard that before. Not using that and making sure that every single qualification isn't mentioned, because women tend to apply less if there's more qualifications, even though men say, oh, I can figure that out. Assessing candidates on the interviewer's overall impression of them, right? My gut says, cultural fit says, right? Those are things we hear often. And so looking at that piece, conducting police record checks can be problematic. Depending on where in the organization they sit, it can be really problematic. Not hiring racialized people for positions they are fully qualified for, or expecting them to be overly qualified as opposed to someone else. We saw that with Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is now currently sitting in the Supreme Court as the first Black woman to sit in the Supreme Court. And there was, in the Washington Post, they laid out her qualifications and they put it up against everybody else in the Supreme Court. And while she checked every single box, other people didn't. But there was all this pushback about her joining. And so are we holding certain people to higher standards that we don't require of others? When we looked at one of the things I talk about, Tara said, do the job performance, requirements prioritize formal education over lived experience. That's another one. Also certifications, all sorts of things can be part of this. And remember, we looked at representation by corporate role. When we look at this entry level, so look at this here, when we look at white men, Look at that. Look at how that grows. But no other group really experiences it in that way, right? We look at white women. As they move in the C-suite, they move up more than most others. Here's white women here. And then men of color are much less. And then women of color, look at that. Look at that purple for women of color, right? Are moving into that C-level less. And so if we want to do something where we talk about legacy and impact as leadership, or when we look at decision-making and who can be most innovative, right? Then what do we need to do around moving folks forward in the organization in ways we may not have considered? Bonus, way to use data to build and maintain healthy workplaces. I'm going to offer one more bonus, right? I say show of hands. If you could type down in the chat, who measures both quantitative and qualitative data? When you start talking about your people in your organization, do you know if they measure both quantitative and qualitative? Say yes if they do both. Yes, they do both. Or I don't know if they don't. Outside consultants in both. Grace says yes. Anybody else? Annie says yes. Who feels comfortable explaining the difference between quantitative and qualitative data? And here's why that's important. We're going to talk about this, but quantitative and qualitative data are different. And so who feels comfortable explaining the differences? A lot of us would say, one is people's experiences and one is based on the actual metrics, right? We would say it that simply, but it's not that simple. And this is what I want to lean on as the bonus today. Last question, who believes their organization as a whole values qualitative data as much as quantitative? Tell me yes or no on that. Who believes their organization values as a whole quantitative data as much as qualitative data? Yes or no? Yes, they value it. No, they don't. Nicole says, yes, our organization does. Anybody else? Grace says, yes, they do. Awesome. So quantitative and qualitative data are often presented as the same. And the ways we talk about qualitative data often discredits or misinterprets the importance of the qualitative data. Because oftentimes, what's the question? How many people said it, right? We go by numbers. And what we actually know is that qualitative data, just scrap it. When we talk about quantitative data, scrap this idea that they're even close to the same thing. Qualitative data is a deep dive into one person's experience, one group's experience. That's it. So it lives on its own. It doesn't live as part of the overall conversation when we just talk about how many said it. It is a deep dive into a group or a person's experience. That's it. And qualitative data tells us the what, the how, and the why. So if you find, as we look back, we looked at that, our former partner, and they said 103%. And every year that was increasing for most backgrounds were leaving the organization, right? They were leaving the organization. Qualitative data tells us why, because when we started to talk to people, that's when we learned so much about going, oh, this is why I'm leaving, or why I left, or why I'm considering, why I'm looking for a new job. It provides a deeper analysis of team members' workplace experiences from various backgrounds and identities. Again, we want to separate it out and say that qualitative data is about one person's or one group's experiences in a workplace. And then qualitative data reveals the most. This data humanizes the numbers and percentages. It is the truth of exactly what wins and issues are in a workplace. It tells us so much. And it's the thing that is the least valued oftentimes when we're looking at data. It challenges or reinforces the image organizations present by offering real life experiences of that workplace. It is genuinely looking into a mirror and seeing a workplace for what it is without a filter. You have a selfie, people putting filters on selfies. You don't even know how people look anymore, right? They don't know how they look anymore. But this takes the filter off. And I know a lot of times we brace ourselves and we're afraid of hearing that information. But if that information means you become a better person and one of your team members is more seen, or that you can say, you know what, we've been able to increase innovation. We've been able to grow in the ways that we think about creating the product, or areas of waste, or the ways that we move throughout processes, because team members feel safe and comfortable to talk about it in the workplace, feel safe and comfortable to raise their hands. They know that their attributes, what they attribute will help them move up if they want that. Can you imagine the ways that would shift a workplace? And so we asked organizations, responses when we asked people, have you considered applying for a new job within the last 3 months? And you look at that, South Asian or Indian said 100%, absolutely. Yep. And if we said, well, how many said it? What does that benefit, right? This is part of the qualitative data. I'm going to leave, right? American Indian, Indigenous, Native, or First Nations, I'm going to leave at 67%. And so we want to think about that. Why that impact? Why that impact? And then for Black Caribbean or African American, when we look at 54%, you said, yes, I am thinking about it. And then, but we look at the number of who actually is leaving the organization. What more of the story does that tell us? Could they be being coached out of the organization too? Maybe I wasn't thinking about leaving, but I'm being pushed out. So we have to be really fierce and inquisitive about what the data says. The percentage of people that reported some form of discrimination in the workplace, when you look at this, right? Southeast Asian, 40%, right? Again, what could that impact? It impacts brand risk. It impacts possible discrimination claims. It impacts whether or not folks are able to function and bring really all of their ideas and their wisdom into the workplace, their expertise, right? If I'm experiencing discrimination, where does my focus go? It goes to that. It's waste, folks. It is waste. Qualitative data is necessary for all root cause analysis. If we're going to talk about people and we're going to do a root cause analysis, we've got to talk about qualitative data. There's no way around it. And so the big secret is your team members are less likely to tell you the truth versus an external partner. It's just what it is, right? And why is that? Because of the types of discrimination that people experience in the workplace. Retaliation is a big one, 63.8%. So if I think I might experience retaliation, why would I say anything? But if I can say that, separate it, right? Then now I can be really honest. And we know that team members are finding out team members or possible team members are how do we find out what they're saying? Online job feedback platforms are amazing. I don't know that we Google that enough or really put time aside often as leaders to say, what are people saying about the organization? Maybe they won't tell me, but they'll put it out in the world. Focus groups do that. Workplace culture and health assessment or survey and exit interviews are a big one, right? I'm leaving. What do I care? But I may not tell it if I'm identifiable, but if I'm anonymous, then I could be really honest. And then what we do is we take those exit interviews, we have those conversations, we run those exit interviews, and we batch them. We give them back to the organization in batches so that they can't trace when people left. And if it's only a few people where it can be traceable, then we hold it. We hold it until we have enough. Because the goal should always be safety. What we have heard when we speak with team members about their experiences in the workplace could be everything from sexual harassment, pregnancy discrimination, gender discrimination, intimidation, racial bias, discrimination, and more. One last thing I want to say to you, your angriest and most disengaged employees could be your biggest workplace culture game changers. Because if you can turn around that relationship with an employee who's felt like they've been wronged in the workplace, my gosh, you've won. And they are willing to be more forward with you. Those employees that seem most disengaged and frustrated may very well be willing to share. All right. All right. So this is where we are. Would love to get questions. Tracy, if you want to pop back would love to share questions. I'm going to put this screen here. Take a picture of this screen as 6 executive and leadership data takeaways. While you ask your questions, I'm just going to go over these. Measure for success over time. Identify the top 2 or 3 issues, focus and account for intersectionality. Connect data with accountability. Understanding what works through broader research and benchmarking. Take historical and societal context into account, and base decisions on the data, period, right? On the data. All right. So Michelle Ortiz says, how do you assess the individuals with remote teams? And when you say that, are you talking about, just want to be clear, individuals who are on remote teams? Is that what you're asking, Michelle? Yes. Okay, great. Same way. The data still tells the truth in that way, right? You can always have someone come in and do a survey of those team members, and interviewing those team members one-to-one can happen. And so it doesn't have to be this idea that that's the beauty of understanding the data, is that no matter where people sit, the data still tells the truth, right? No matter where they sit in the organization, whether they come to an office or are remote, the data will always bring you back to the truth of what's actually happening in the workplace. And in the workplace, we know now is scoped much bigger than it used to be. Thank you for that question, Michelle. Did I answer your question? All right, great. Terry said, can we think of quantitative data as just the numbers, while qualitative data are the powerful stories behind the numbers? Stories are what people often remember. Yes, you can do both. I like to marry the two, and I'll tell you why. Because folks are wired differently. So while stories may work really well for one person, some people need the quantitative as well to say, oh, I need to understand, how does this impact? And the stories bolster, right, that quantitative data. So always mix of both, just because people are wired differently, and there's no right or wrong to that. That's a great question. Thank you, Terry. Jana says, thank you for this content. It is my absolute pleasure. Remember, again, if you would like, we still have time for a couple more questions. And then exit interviews are very invaluable, just to know that. Only 28% of HR folks really act on it. And so we have a resource guide. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, you'll get an implementable resource around exit interviews. Layla says, if we don't want to ask associates to self-disclose their identities, should we make a guess based on representation? I think that's a hard one. I'm going to tell you why. Because someone may see themselves differently than how we see them. Yes, you may share this with your colleagues, and please do, may see it very different. And so I guess I would be really interested in why you don't ask employees to self-identify. I do know, based on countries, that can be different, like what we can and what we can't ask people. And so it's really important to think about that. Do we receive a copy of the slides? Tanisha, we don't do that. Actually, because it's regularly changing. We always want to make sure that we're providing the best information. But if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get information like this on a regular basis.
And you can see the recording
as
the
well.
Webinar.
Yep. Yeah, you'll get the recording as well, so that you'll have the information. We just don't send out the slides. But yes, so yeah, think about this as we really want people to be able to self-identify instead of making assumptions about other people. Because there's some things like someone may have an invisible disability that you can't see. And so it doesn't get accounted. So as much as we can get people to self-identify, the better. Any more questions? Sign up for the newsletter. Also, I didn't mention, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I am a LinkedIn top voice. Follow us on LinkedIn. We have 57,000 followers. Lots of great content happens on LinkedIn. We did a great one today about cultural humility and a mistake I made out in the public. So find me at Kim Crowder or Kim Crowder Consulting. And someone said, I have about 10,000 pages of notes. Great. I can't wait to share with my peers, Layla. Then make sure you sign up for the newsletter, and just say, give me a quick yes. Did you, or you have one takeaway that you can take home, or you can take back with you to the workplace where you feel like you can move forward? Just say yes if you did. If you feel like you got one thing, just one thing, that is a win for us. We got a lot of yeses. Shannon, Tanisha, Jen, and awesome. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you, JIT Cafe, for having me. Thank you, Tracy, for
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for coming to the JIT Cafe. We'd love to have you anytime you want to come, because that was very valuable and we just don't talk about this enough. I know you're changing that though.
That's right. That's why I'm here.
Thanks,
Listen, our businesses
everyone.
do not run without people, so we have to have people.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you again soon, maybe at 2 o'clock today for the premiere drop party.